This year, of course, marks 10 years since the first iPhone appeared. So it's been 10 years since we've had an iPhone, and the technology is just amazing. It's given us lots of opportunities. It's also given us many, many challenges. So we've enlisted the help of Professor Donna Cross to help us today with some of her insights and some of the latest research into this technology, its positives and also its negatives, and what you'll be able to do to harness those. Now, Donna, of course, is from the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences at the University of Western Australia and also Telethon Kids. And over the years, her research has led to countless successful programs being implemented right the way around Australia and, of course, here in Western Australia. The No Hat, No Play, blame this lady, or congratulate her. So they're the sort of things that she does. They're really practical things that really do make a difference to our society. In fact, for her services to children's health and wellbeing research, Donna received the 2012 WA Australian of the Year Award, and in 2015 was inducted as a fellow to the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences. Most recently, she was awarded a Churchill Fellowship. Now, and it's results of that fellowship that she's going to share with us here today. So without any further ado, would you please put your hands together and welcome our special guest speaker today, Professor Donna Cross.
Kaya Wanju, Frida. Thank you. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, past, present and future, because they're the ones that we care about deeply in our professions and enjoy sharing this wonderful country with you. Now, my role today is to share with you some research that we've been doing over a number of years. In fact, I'd ask you that if you were born before 1986, could you stand, please? Now, look around the room, and those who are seated are the experts here today. Because all of you were born, probably like me, well before the internet was invented, which is that date. And as you heard from Christine, that we've now had the smartphone or iPhone for 10 years. So this is really new for us. So as I talk through the content today, those people who are standing now, if you have moments where you just go, oh my goodness, I have no idea, I want you to know that the tail end of my presentation, probably the last 4 or 5 slides, is just for you. The things that we need to help us get through, and if you can catch up with the people who are still seated over morning tea, they can teach you other stuff too. So welcome. Now, to begin, I guess I'd like to argue today that sometimes, and particularly because I'm old, according to my children, I'm very old. I don't think I am until I look in the mirror. But the challenge that we have is that often, because we don't understand technology, our first move is to block and ban. And I'd like to argue that that's the worst thing that we can do. The more that we block and ban, the greater the chasm between us and the children that we love and care for. We need to get down and dirty, we need to sit with them, we need to understand, we need to educate ourselves, we need to use young people as our media mentors so that we really engage and understand what they love about this space. Because when we're in the space with them, we can look after them most effectively. We can't look after them effectively if we're just stopping them from going into this technology, because we won't understand it. We won't understand what they love about it and why they like being in that space. So you can see in the red there that I'd like to focus today on, let's move beyond, let's just turn it off. That's not the best solution. And I'd like to argue strongly as to why, but what we do instead. Obviously, the other choice isn't free range. The other choice is deliberate, intentional use of technology. That's when we get the best benefit for children's development and learning. And I'd like to show you some of the research that, as you can imagine, that's new too. We don't have longitudinal research yet to see what the impact is of 2-year-olds spending a great deal of time on iPads. We have some suggestions about what that might look like, and I'll talk to that today, but we're really not sure. It's still preliminary evidence, and sadly it's going to take us probably another 10, 15 years of observing generations of children who've grown up with technology to see what the impact was, particularly on their neural structure. Now, how is it influencing brain development, which is the part that I'm most interested in, and that was what my Churchill was addressing. So today's a pretty special day, and not only because you're here and you get a chance to catch up with your colleagues, but because it's a really important day in the United Nations, and obviously recognising the rights of a child. This is United Nations Day of the Child, and this week is Children's Week, as I'm sure you've worked out. And there's some really important issues associated with this convention, and Australia was pretty slow signing up to this relative to other Western countries. But it says something that's really important to us, and that's preserving the rights so that we can really optimise and advance children's development. So our job is not just to get every child functioning so that they are ready for school, as we so often hear people say, but wherever a child is on their continuum of development, it's our job to just nudge them a little bit further along so that we're giving them the opportunity to do the best that they can. And that's largely what these rights are about, is giving children the greatest opportunity wherever they are to improve on their current status. And we're in a really privileged position, you know, as early childhood educators, as people who work around children from birth to 18, till they don't become children anymore. I wrote at the top there that educators are trusted by parents in the most sacred way. What a shame we're not paid accordingly. Parents leave their children with us. And there is nothing more precious in my life than my children, and I certainly left them in the care of wonderful carers. And there was a wonderful quote by Fred Rogers, and I think this is important for us to think about, particularly as we reflect on our use of technology. And he's talking about he and his wife and their role as parents. And you would know that in the US, Fred Rogers was obviously the television hero who talked to families through the television, through media. The media that we were all worried about all those years ago, that now has become commonplace and still presents a challenge in some ways. But he says, I recall many times we wish we'd said or done something different, and I'm sure we do that in our roles daily. But we didn't, and we've learned not to feel too guilty about that. What gives us good feelings about our parenting is that we always cared and always tried to do our best. And that's what I know you do. And the fact that you would give your time this morning to come here just shows that you too want to give your best. And of course, in doing that, we need to find the best in every parent. So every parent that we see there and in our daily contact is fundamental to the sorts of changes that we want to achieve. And if you could go to the very top line that I have there, which is strengthen a parent and you strengthen a child. So by talking to parents about technology, that's not the only thing we'll talk to them about, but to engage them and share with them the sorts of things that you're learning about technology, that strengthens them, and they in turn can build closer relationships with their children. So I'd like to argue that that's kind of the mantra that we'll build around the presentation today. Now, all of us know this, we're sort of flooded with this kind of new information that we're dealing with. Not only are we dealing with technology in the sense of children's use of it for their learning and development, but we are also challenged because in the last 15 or 16 years, we've had access to MRIs, which have allowed us to really understand neural development, to be able to see which parts of the brain are firing when children are learning different activities, which will allow us in the longer term, we'll be able to use technology, I can't predict when, but soon, to see whether things that we're teaching children are igniting those areas of their brain that we hope that they would. So if we're encouraging language and we're using a strategy that isn't firing in that area where it needs to build language, we know we're on the wrong track. Now, we've never had that. We kind of do our best guess. We think that this is working because we've observed that over time, yes, they are learning language. But wouldn't it be amazing if we had the kinds of feedback that would tell us, you know what, that strategy's not working for that child. Try this. Getting other approaches for children who may be more challenged in their learning, being able to understand what's really working for them. And they're the wonderful things that we'll have with technology, and we already have that through MRIs that allow us to see this amazing plasticity that we have from a very young age. And as many of you would know, the plasticity, the first 1,000 days that people talk about, now you might be thinking, they say up to age 2, how do they get to 1,000 days? Well, of course, they're counting from conception. That's the 1,000 days from conception to age 2. And that first 1,000 days is extraordinary. And if you look at how many new neurons are connecting per second during that period, and I thought you might like to know how big a neuron is, because sometimes, well, conceptually, what is this like? And a grain-sized speck of your brain contains 100,000 neurons. So just think of the activity that's going on. So you've got a grain, and there's 100,000 of them, and there are 1,000 new connections that are going on every second, millions. In the time that I might present this morning. that are creating these synapses, which are the connections, the links between those neurons. And we want to thicken those. We want to thicken them in positive ways. So if I'm learning a poor behaviour, like if I hit a child, I get something back, that neuron will thicken as well if I continue to learn it. So it's important that that plasticity is not just about optimising learning, but optimising positive learning so that we can make the most of that, and the implications that that has for the ways that we might integrate technology into our learning. So really just kind of setting the scene that we have this amazing opportunity and a period of huge plasticity. Now I want you to just reflect for a moment. If a child is being breastfed, and I think about breastfeeding my 2 children, and that amazing moment when you've got them there and you're looking at them and they're smiling back at you and making all those lovely gurgly sounds that they love to make. That serve and return, that baby smiling, parent looking back, is a really important time to establish neural pathways which are foundational. So if we want to build a strong house, we have to have really firm foundations. If those foundations are weak, the house is weak. Those foundations are established through that serve and return. If children don't build attachment, if they are in environments where they're not getting that opportunity to build attachment, not necessarily just with the mother and through breastfeeding, but all the ways that we engage children, so that establishes a neural foundation, which is key to everything that goes on. Now I want you to imagine that I'm breastfeeding my baby, and I've got my mobile phone, and I've got a pretty good thumb, and I'm able to do all these sorts of things. There's a little baby here looking at my face, and I'm not responding. My husband says when I'm on the email, I have an email face. I don't know what that means. But we do have a frozen face when we look at technology. And the challenge that preliminary research is suggesting is that we're missing many serve and return opportunities with babies because of technology being part of a parent's life and other adults' life. So those smiles that we're missing are absolutely key to that neural structure. So potentially, what damage might we be doing if we're missing that serve and return, that foundational work that goes on? To encourage parents to set their technology aside, set times that they use their technology. So as important as it will be, as you'll see later, the parameters we put around children's use of technology, we really need to work with parents to do the same, to encourage them to engage. If you've ever heard of the still face experiments, could you raise your hand, please? I'm sure most of you, part of your training. And of course, the still face experiments, there's a lot of video online. You'll see them where a gorgeous toddler is sitting in a high chair and the parents interacting in the way that they would normally do, and engaging and chatting and so on. And then the researcher says, hold your face still. So don't frown or don't do anything, just hold it still. And then watch, and then they've observed this. This isn't just one person, they do it multiple times to see the pattern. And what they've noticed is the baby initially, or the toddler sort of looks around and, what's going on? Why am I not getting anything back? And then becomes more animated to try and get the parents' attention, and then it continues to work until eventually they get quite distressed and start to cry. And of course, they're soothed immediately by the adults that are around them. But those still face experiments are talking about the importance of serve and return. The frozen face of technology is one of our first challenges. So when you think about children's development and learning, from the moment that they're born, when we introduce technology into their life by our behaviour, and I don't mean your behaviour, but the parents that we have contact with, that obviously could limit their child's neural development. So what kinds of messages would we have for parents in the contact that we have with them? How do we help them be the best that they can be without making them feel guilty? Parents feel guilty enough. We don't want to build shame. We want to give them ideas. We want to suggest ways that they can interact, and I've got some that I'll show you in just a moment. So we know that this first 1,000 days is pretty critical, and if you look at the sort of conception to age 2, you can see why it's so critical. When you look at the sensory pathways, the language, even the higher cognitive development, the functioning that we might be establishing, has a very steep curve before age 2. So if we look at everything to your left of the green arrow, that's what we are potentially disrupting if parents are fully engaged with technology when they're around their children. If you hear a person talking about, I'm babysitting a child, what on earth does that mean? Are you just going to sit and watch and let the baby do what they want, or are you going to engage with them? So encouraging people even to get rid of that language that baby sitting, just sitting alongside them is not enough. We've got to encourage them to engage and to understand the importance that that provides in neural function. Now, not only is it important because children's development is so affected by that time, but it's also economically beneficial. And I'm sure you've all seen this work by Heckman. And Heckman's argued that this, again, sort of first 1,000 days plus 1 year, another 365 days, 365 days, gives us the best returns on investment. So if we really put our time and effort in, if we can just limit our technology for those first 3 years as much as we can, as parenting is one example, that can make a huge difference. And of course for government, it's not only an equity issue to make sure that we enable every child to have the best chance during that period of huge neural growth, but it's also an issue economically for them, that they will get the best return on investment. In fact, when you look at some of the returns on investment, they're enormous. You all should be paid quadruple the amount that you're paid for the influence that you have on the economy and on equity issues for children. It's your roles that are critical. You all should be congratulating yourselves. When you were doing hip hip hooray 3 times before, there should be for you. Because without your investment, the work of Meralinga, the work of many organisations that are pushing to enable children, particularly under 3, to be able to maximise their outcomes is key. And as you can see here, the financial returns are great, and of course, the earlier the better for that intervention. Because learning begets learning. That means if I have a little bit of learning, so that enables me to develop more learning. I need that foundational learning to build on each other. So return on investment, have a look at this. Imagine if you had a share portfolio that returned from between 75% and 1,000% in terms of investment relative to costs. So what you invested, what the return was relative to costs. Now, what's really interesting about this research is it only focuses on educational outcomes. The work that we're doing, funded by Minderoo, is enabling us to look at all of the health and education and labour and welfare costs that are incurred as somebody works through their life course, and what the synergistic effect of really good quality early learning has on the total cost. So this is just part of the story. And in fact, Heckman and others have argued that we need to know more. We've got a summit coming up in Perth in November where we're inviting the best economists in the world to think about how we can do this better and have a better estimate so we can convince government they need to fund early years better. They need a minister of early years to be able to support integrated delivery and to provide the support that we need for the work that you all do. So let's bring that neural development and focus on technology for a moment. So all I was doing is really setting the context. Now, why do we need to understand the influence of technology so much? It's because this period of neural development is just so critical. We can establish neural pathways that are odd. Now, if you've ever heard of the game or the app and video series called Baby Einstein, could you raise your hand, please? And raise your hand if you know of any others that are sort of like that, not to just pick on Baby Einstein, but where parents are pushed to buy things for their children under 3 years of age because that will really maximise their learning. Well, the sad thing is there isn't any evidence that says that helps or hinders. There just isn't any evidence. So they're all marketed as having an incredible educational effect, but at the moment we have no evidence, which means it's equivocal. So it might well do, but we don't understand it. There's a researcher who works in Seattle, and his work has focused on what happens when children are given these kinds of educational apps. What happens to their neural development? So picking up on the comments that I've already talked about. And he looked at, and not just to pick on Baby Einstein, but it was the most popular of the educational apps and resources that were being provided to children in America at the time. So they put on one of those EEGs, which is like a crazy shower cap with all the white spots on it, and that measures neural activity. And they have done a series of tests, his team in Seattle, and observed what happens to children's neural development when they're on something like Baby Einstein. So of those people who know about Baby Einstein, raise your hand if you ever watched one. I hadn't until I saw this research. Okay. So if you haven't seen one, it looks something like this. So farmyard, and here's a chicken, here's a cow, He's a sheep and there's music going and it's really fast and it's very entertaining and even entertaining for an adult, but too fast for a child of this age. And he's arguing that it is training the child neurally to be responding to really fast stuff. He's made a bold statement and it's really preliminary, so no, there's by no means are we sure. We need a lot more research before we can speak to this with great gusto. But he argues that perhaps we're training our children to have attention deficit in the sense that they're looking for things that are highly stimulated because that's the way their brain is being trained in that moment. So his argument is that children under 2, and the American Academy of Pediatrics have used his research and other research to recommend that under 2, children should have no access to technology. Under 2, no access to technology except video opportunities where children could talk to their parents or their grandparents by Skype or by FaceTime or something like that, where it's enriching their face-to-face contact. He argues, of course, we all know that children can't easily take 2-dimensional and understand what it looks like in a 3-dimensional world. So they see the cow in Baby Einstein or other things that they might be seeing, even in a book. And when they see the cow in the paddock, they don't necessarily know that they are the same. So the important contribution that Dimitri's work has suggested is that any time that parents are using technology with their children, they must always be making the transfer from virtual to current reality. So if you're using an electronic book, so using an iPad or something like that, which is a great way to read to children. So technology with an adult alongside it is where the adult is interacting with the child is a great way to use technology, even for children under 2, where they're present and the adult is talking through what the child is seeing and engaging with the child through that process and drawing that connection. So if they're playing a game that's asking them to do sorting, when they put the game down after less than 20 minutes ideally, and go and then practice sorting shopping or sorting coloured pegs so that they can see how that transfers to the external environment. Really important step that children need to be working through to be able to maximise the opportunities that they have to extend the right neural development. So all of us have, I'm not going to go to this clip because it'll take me too long to get back again and I don't want Brent to have to run up over here. But this clip and many others that you would see is videoing a child who's picked up an adult's phone and away they're going with all the walking around and chatting and so on, and how much they're modelling and mimicking adult behaviour. And parents get very alarmed and we get alarmed as educators in terms of what we should be doing, and often, as I said at the start, our response is just to ban it. Well, you heard me say a little while ago that the American Academy of Pediatrics says no access to technology to children under 2. Now, they're trying to have a clean message. That message is really that children get no benefit from solo interaction with technology under 2. No benefit whatsoever, and in fact, maybe some harms because of the potential neural development that happens. But if an adult's engaged, we know that reading to a child from birth is important. We know that many adults don't realise that they should be reading to their children from the moment they first get to hold their child. So the use of technology as an electronic book, as something to stimulate discussion and interaction between adults and children is really important. The challenge is that it's often used as a babysitter, to use the term that I used before. So I'd like to argue that if we ban only, it shuts down learning and it shuts down parents. So we need to be interacting as part of that process. We need to think about technology like books. We need to make contact. We need to help children interact in that environment and show them